Hello and welcome to the Photo Brigade podcast. I am Robert Kaplan. Today I have acclaimed photographer Ron Haviv on the show. How you doing, Ron?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
So glad to have you. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you guys know to subscribe to our YouTube page. We have an awesome YouTube page where we post all of these great podcasts, live events that we mostly do here at Adorama in their event space, which is where we are. So please check us out at Photo Brigade on YouTube. We are also check out Adorama's live events at adorama.com/events. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all sorts of social media to check out when we do all these different live events. Big thanks to Canon Professional Services for their support and also Temba Bags. With no further ado, I should introduce Ron. So, Ron Haviv is an Emmy-nominated award-winning photojournalist and co-founder of the 7 Photo Agency, dedicated to documenting conflict, raising awareness about human rights issues around the globe. In the last 3 decades, Ron has covered more than 25 conflicts and worked in over 100 countries. You name it, he's probably shot it. He's published 3 critically acclaimed collections of photography and has just published his 4th, titled The Lost Rolls. And his work has been featured in numerous museums and galleries, including the Louvre, United Nations, the Council on Foreign Relations. President George H.W. Bush cited Ron's chilling photographs documenting paramilitary violence in Panama as one of the reasons for the 1989 American intervention. His work has been published in just about every major publication worldwide, and he continues to produce amazing visual communication editorially, commercially, as well as motion now with cinematography. So welcome, Ron Haviv. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So, Ron, I want to, there's so much to talk about, in your career. I'm going to go through some of your portfolio work here as we kind of talk about your early days. And I was wondering if you can kind of tell me where you grew up, how you got into the world of photography.
Well, to be honest with you, I really fell into it. I was studying at NYU and was hoping to be a journalist, to be a writer. That's what I was studying. And my uncle, who was a serious hobby photographer, gave me a camera for Christmas one time. And a friend of mine at university was also a serious hobby photographer. And I started to kind of be exposed a little bit to photography. And then going to university in New York, NYU, incredibly expensive, so I had a multitude of different jobs to help pay for it. And one of them happened to be working for the agent of a very famous fashion photographer, Francesco Scavullo.
Oh, really?
And so I got to see a little bit of photography in a real way. Kind of hanging out a little bit and carrying around his portfolio and so on. And for some reason, and I don't know why or how or when it exactly happened, I decided that I would rather tell stories with images rather than with words. I probably need to go through deep hypnosis to really kind of bring out the reason why I made that choice, but I did. And basically started to teach myself photography.
And so you're originally from New York City.
From Brooklyn.
From Brooklyn, went to high school here, and so you're a New Yorker. And you didn't go to NYU for photography?
Did not.
What were you studying?
I was studying to be a writer, studying journalism, and then in my last year I took a basic photojournalism class and was sort of teaching myself on the fly on how to be a photographer.
And when you were in school, were you doing any work for newspapers or magazines locally or anything like that?
It was towards the end, right around when I was graduating, I started to try to figure out what to do as a photographer. And once I graduated, I picked up the phone and I started calling every media source in New York, from AP through to down to the New York Times, and was laughed at and had the phone hung up on me as I had my little spiel. I'm Ron Haviv. You should hire me as a photographer. And basically, just a lot of laughter in the background. But eventually, one small newspaper said, "Sure, come on in," and they gave me an internship.
And what newspaper was that?
It's a paper called the New York City Tribune. It's no longer around. It was the sister paper of the Washington Times. It's owned by the Unification Church. They were trying to make a push into the New York market. And eventually I got my first assignment covering a press conference at City Hall and got my first picture published, which nobody saw because the circulation of the newspaper was like 1,000 people. But I started to meet other photographers and very quickly became incredibly welcomed into this amazing world of photojournalism.
What was the first? I mean, you've done so many things. On top of, we're going to go into all the conflict photography that you got into. But in the early days, you wanted to tell these stories. What was maybe one of your first projects that you worked on personally that sort of set this off?
Well, to be honest with you, in the beginning, I was really trying to figure out how to survive. So I was really trying to get work and trying to learn about the craft. So much of the time was spent, especially in the first internship, at the newspaper, learning how to process film, how to print, how to work on deadline. And I wasn't so much doing immediately long-term personal projects and so on. And then I started to freelance a little bit more. I got an internship at AFP, started to be exposed to kind of journalism around the world.
What did you do at the internship?
At AFP, they were giving me assignments. I was learning how to kind of work at the bureau and so on, and then eventually it turned into paid assignments.
Was it locally here in New York?
It was here in New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of coverage did you do? Like just
I was a paparazzi photographer.
Yeah.
I photographed premieres. There's a movie called Paparazzi. There's a scene of me like running through the streets of New York chasing some celebrities. So
Really?
It's not a very well-known fact, but that it was
Interesting.
one of my beginnings. One of my first pictures that got a lot of play was a photograph of Madonna at the premiere of a Broadway show, and then just started to move into press conferences, protests, and so on, and started getting published in Time magazine and other things through AFP, and then also becoming exposed that there was a world of photography outside of New York.
Who were did you look up to any particular photographers? Obviously you started interestingly in the fashion world, which surprised me. Do you find inspiration from the fashion photography, or was there anybody that you really started looking up to in the beginning that set you off?
I think in the beginning it was the people that were teaching me in the field. So at AFP it was David Cantor and Don Emmert, who's still running AFP here in New York, who really were incredibly influential in kind of establishing my work ethic and what photography can do. And then as I started to move along, I met people like Chris Morris and Gilles Perez and James Noctway, and they were both, in terms of their work, inspirational, but also incredible mentors for me.
Yeah. So that kind of brings us into, you graduated college, you then started getting into covering conflicts. And if I'm not mistaken, your first sort of dive into that was Panama?
Correct.
Can you tell me sort of what spurred your thought of, putting your life on the line to cover such a dangerous sort of topic?
Well, I mean, like many people, especially when you're young, you don't really think about all the different sort of consequences and what you're about to do. And so for me, Panama came sort of very organically. I was actually covering the Gay Pride Parade in New York one day, and I saw this photographer walking around, and the guy looked like he'd walked off of a movie set about photographers. It was like really good looking, long blonde hair, the requisite photojournalism scarf, press credentials, and so I was like, oh, I want to know who this guy is. And I went up and I introduced myself, and his name was Chris Morris. And Chris and I were talking. And I asked Chris, where are you going next? Because Chris had just come back from the Philippines. He'd been working for Newsweek. And he said, oh, I'm going to Panama next. And I said to him, well, I'm also going to Panama.
Really?
I didn't know where
Just made that
Panama
right up.
was, didn't know what was happening in Panama, but I figured this guy who's obviously like the cool photojournalist knows where the story is, so I should go there. And to make a very long story short, basically, I wound up getting an assignment. I lost the assignment. I ran into Chris. I told him what had happened, and he said, I have an extra plane ticket for you if you want to take it. And he gave me a plane ticket, and off we went to Panama.
Oh,
together.
wow.
And so not only did he help me get there, I was able to work with him and learn from him in the field. An election that was being held by the dictator that went wrong, became very violent, and then wound up taking a photograph that wound up on the cover of Time and Newsweek.
Which is this photo right
Exactly.
here. Yeah, this is sort of the photo that really put you on the map.
It did.
Would you say? And can you tell me a little bit behind making an image like this and getting it out there and what it felt? Because you were how old? 20, 22?
22, 23 years old, yeah.
22, 23, covering. I mean, this was violent. I mean, this couldn't have been. You're I believe you said I was watching a movie about you, National Geographic. If you guys haven't seen it, you can check it out on YouTube. There's a National Geographic documentary on Ron covering all sorts of conflict from back in the 90s. But you said there were bullets flying. It was a dangerous situation. Bring us through covering something like this and making that image.
Well, the dictator, General Manuel Noriega, had lost the election. He nullified the result, and the would-be victors came out onto the streets to kind of start an uprising. And the man here on the left, covered in blood, is the vice president-elect. And he wound up hitting a roadblock with the military. And as they were stopped by the military, these paramilitary guys, the guy in the blue shirt, and a group of others came running towards them, shooting and beating people. And his bodyguard was killed lying on top of him. He was then stabbed in the arm. So the blood is a mix of his and his bodyguard. And it was the first time that I heard gunfire. It was the first time that I was really involved in sort of very, very specific violence. But there's also was this very odd calm within the eye of the storm. And as he sort of stumbled out of his car and I went to photograph him, the paramilitary guy said to me, "Excuse me, con permiso," in Spanish, to step around me in order for him to beat up the vice president, who fought back very valiantly and then was arrested by the army and disappeared.
And disappeared.
Yeah, he disappeared for a little while. And eventually, when the United States invaded, he was restored as the vice president of the country.
So this is in 1989. You were shooting film. Tell me how you ended up getting this image out to the world and then sort of where it ended up.
So I had been, given my relationship with AFP in New York, I had gone there and was working during the election for them at $50 a picture. And that day they told me, we were totally covered. We don't need anybody. So I was completely on my own. And so I was photographing and covered this scene, and I called them up out of a sense of loyalty and also the fact that this would be a great way to distribute the work around the world. At the same time, I was being called by agencies to buy the rights to it exclusively, but I at that point, I really thought that I wanted to be an AFP photographer, so I wanted to sort of show them my loyalty. So I brought them the work, and they developed it, they scanned it, they transmitted it, and then by the next day it was on newspapers around the world, and by the end of the week on all the magazines.
So this was you got the trifecta. This one landed on the cover of 3 of the major U.S. magazines.
It did.
So at the age of 22, 23, all of a sudden you're just like on the scene. What did that feel like, getting that, having that kind of recognition all of a sudden so quickly? The obviously it paid off going, taking this chance. What was it like for you?
At the time, it was all about me. It was like, this is great. I was like, this photojournalism thing's not that hard. You go somewhere, you take some pictures, you get some covers.
Yeah.
I don't really understand what the big deal is. But it was really kind of just all about like myself, my career, what can I do with this? And it wasn't really until 6 months later when the United States invaded and I heard the speech by the president talking about the photographs as being part of that conversation of their decision to invade. It wasn't whether I agreed with the invasion or not. It was also an understanding that the photography that I do, that my colleagues do, can play this role. Then I was also, it's not about me. It's about the people. It's about the story. It's about what we're trying to say. And so it was kind of that 1-2 punch that really kind of pushed me and solidified my desire to do this kind of work. And then also understanding that many of the things that happen historically, countries that are born, countries that die, often happen in terms of violence. And it's where the eyes of the world are most needed. And that's why I've spent much of my time in conflict zones and post-conflict zones.
Did you find that you got a rush from this type of work? How much does that play into it as well? I mean, obviously you get I couldn't imagine what it must have felt like. And I think I heard you in one of these documentaries talking about how hearing the bullets fly is one thing, but until you actually see the consequence of that, somebody getting hit by that bullet or dying from that bullet didn't really affect you. When did it, what was there a time when it was like, holy crap, what I'm doing is really dangerous? Or at this point, was it still, I'm a young guy and nothing's going to happen to me?
I think at this point, really early on, it was a little bit hard to really understand the consequences. But very quickly, from war to war, from situation to situation, starting to see, the impact, there was no real rush in terms of like, I can't wait to go get shot at again. It's not very exciting to be able to do that. It's great to be able to survive it, but it's not like something that I really strive for. But what is the rush and what is interesting is witnessing history, seeing that for myself, being able to document that and show the world my interpretation. That's definitely, on the non-altruistic side of what I do, the selfish side, like for me to be able to do that is very exciting.
Was Panama the first country in your passport ever? Like, did you travel before this?
No, I had traveled before.
Oh, so you did travel. So you were a little bit well-traveled. Okay, so, we should also mention, I mentioned in the opening that photo also was cited by the President of the United States as their reason to, come into the country and everything. Did you expect that? Like I couldn't imagine watching. It was an Oval Office address too, wasn't it? When he said this. So, how were you watching it live, or did you just get a call like, oh my God, the president?
No, I was actually on my way to Panama to cover the invasion. So I didn't hear about that or see that speech until several days later. But it was, it was obviously a complete surprise. And it was this real eye-opening experience to understand that the work that I was doing could actually reach people that are in that level of power. And that was fascinating.
Right. So you ended up going, and I know these photos that I'm showing aren't necessarily in any kind of proper order to the audience here, but you ended up going to Haiti after that, covering some conflict there. You've been back since the earthquake, which was, did you visit, you went and covered a bunch of Haiti, and then did you take a break from there, or do you go back to these countries that you have documented in the past on a regular basis to kind of show change over time?
Haiti is one of the countries that since 1990, I've been going back almost every year. I've probably been there at least 20 times, if not more. Mm-hmm. So I've spent quite a lot of time there. Of course, the earthquake being the most recent huge story. And then I just finished a long-term project in Haiti where I was documenting the adoption of 4 Haitian children by an American family. And that was a 2-year project that I did for People magazine.
Did it take 2 years to complete the adoption, or has it just been?
Unfortunately, it took them 2 years. It took them over a year and a half to get all the paperwork and do everything, and then eventually I followed them back home to Florida and was able to document them at home as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually popped over to Haiti, literally just in and out for a few hours when the earthquake had happened. I was down in Florida by happenstance, and I called up one of these flights that was bringing in aid, and we ended up popping in, and it was just devastating. I couldn't believe, You talk about, so all these things that you've been covering conflict, but then you also cover natural disaster as well. This being you've covered numerous, more than just Haiti earthquake. Mm-hmm. What sort of natural disasters have you covered, and what's it like compared to covering conflict?
I've been in the United States, the aftermath of San Francisco earthquake and Hurricane Katrina and various other unfortunate natural disasters have occurred around the world. And a lot of it is very similar to conflict because it is actually a war with nature, that nature usually wins, at least in the beginning. And it's about survival, and it's about getting people help. Mm-hmm. And it's about making sure that people understand what's going on. And I think Haiti is a pretty amazing example of the work that journalism can do, because the amount of aid and support that came was one of the direct results of the journalism, especially the visuals, not only from myself, but from all my colleagues that were working there, showing people what had happened there and basically pushing people to donate and for countries to send in rescue teams and to send in aid and to send in hospitals and so on. And I think it was in the immediate sense, a reasonably successful response.
Uh-huh. And that must be a pretty amazing feeling to not only be part of change, real change, whether it's, through heads of state citing your work and intervening, or whether it's sorry, these guys are whistling back there, or whether it's helping with the natural disasters and whatnot. Is that more of does that satisfaction keep you going? What keeps you going back? I don't know necessarily that it's the money. Because I know with journalism in general, there's not too much money to be made as a photojournalist. You got to
absolutely not the money.
You got to have another drive to do this. Is it that sort of giving? Do you feel you're giving back through your photography in a way?
I'm not sure if giving back is exactly the right word, but or phrase, but I think that this idea that the work is having impact, and the fact that so very early on with Panama, the president speaking about the work, and then later on, my work in the former Yugoslavia being used as evidence in war crimes tribunals, and other work being used to raise money for various NGOs to send support to refugees or displaced people or hurricane victims or earthquake victims. I mean, understanding that the photography can actually play a role in this process is my main motivation. And then one of the things that now, having been doing this for now more than 25 years, I've been able to speak to people that I photographed and found out how the photograph affected their lives. And then to speak to random people who told me, like, I saw that photograph and that made me think this, and I changed my behavior and did X. And that's the beauty and power of photography, especially of photojournalism.
That's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about how you went from country to country and sort of the safety element of it. Obviously, going to conflicts, you're risking a lot. However, you kind of started using a buddy system where you would go with a group of photographers from place to place. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, when you're in those kind of buddy systems, you're all shooting the same thing. Do you feel a bit of competition when, because I couldn't imagine having 4 or 5 of the best conflict photographers all in the same group. It's like, do you look at like, what's James doing over there? What's so-and-so doing over here? Do you always find a different angle? How does that work?
Well, first of all, I think that, especially now, it's incredibly dangerous to do this job because people are very aware of the power of the image.
Yeah.
And people are trying to control it. And we've all seen, obviously, what's happened with James Foley and Steven Sotloff and others, and where people are very conscious of the role of journalists. But kind of when I started, that wasn't as apparent. But by the time that the war in Bosnia occurred, we were being targeted specifically because we were journalists. In the beginning of the conflict in Yugoslavia, we would put TV in our cars and it would allow us free passage and safe passage. Within 2 years of that, it actually made us a target. And it became very, very difficult to work. So we had to, and it was necessary often to make sure that that we worked in groups or teams at least, so you wouldn't just disappear and nobody would know what happened to you. In terms of kind of like in the field sort of competition, I think that in the end, at least I thought, and I think a number of my colleagues thought, it wasn't really so much about who got the best picture. It was about getting the story out. And as media became more and more fragmented, it was important that there was an AP guy, a Reuters guy, a Time, a Newsweek person, because all of us needed to be able to reach as many people as possible. And then, of course, the nature of photography is that you and I can be standing next to each other taking a photograph, and we'll come out with a completely different image.
Yeah.
There might be some of the same elements obviously, because we're photographing the same thing, but my vision could be completely different than yours. And so that aspect of kind of the competition part is not really a relevant part of the conversation.
That's great. It's almost as if you're working on a team. You hear so much in at least local news photographers. It's interesting because it's different. You feel like they're all kind of competing against each other. And that was, as a photojournalist, I interned at the New York Times and freelanced for them for a while. But here in New York, at least, it's like it seems pretty rough. Like everyone's sort of competing against each other. But I really love how you guys are sort of working as a team throughout this. Again, with the danger, I know you've had numerous close calls. You during the invasion, the Iraq invasion or the Gulf invasion, you were taken prisoner. That's frightening. I mean, that's crazy. Can you tell me a little bit about your close calls and the danger element of what happened with the...
Well, I've been very lucky. I mean, I've had a number of colleagues who have been wounded, and of course, we know Chris Hondros and Tim Hetherington and others that have lost their lives covering conflict. And so I've never been wounded, and the worst that's happened to me is I've been taken prisoner on a number of occasions, been arrested dozens of times, but actually a few times where governments had to become involved in order to try to get my freedom. And often it's part of the understanding that you're taking risks in doing what you're doing, and it's also trying not to make mistakes. And so when I was taken prisoner along with some other journalists at the end of the first Gulf War in Iraq, we were stupid. We should have turned left, and we went straight, and we wound up driving right into the Iraqi Republican Guard, and wound up in a variety of different detention centers until we eventually were released as part of the actual, I was told, part of the final peace agreement with the Iraqis that released the journalists. Mm-hmm. And so you try not to become part of the story or be the story itself, but sometimes it's difficult, and you try to be as smart as you can, which is why, when I teach a lot of workshops, and I tell my students that there are these courses called hostile environment courses that basically came out of the war in Yugoslavia because so many of us were being killed by making stupid mistakes. So these hostile environment courses are often taught by ex-military, usually British special forces. And they teach journalists how to survive and how to work in these war zones with an emphasis on first aid trauma. RISK is another organization that Sebastian Junger started after Tim Tetherington's death. They give free classes, so I encourage any young journalist who's thinking about going anywhere outside of their home area to be trained in the very least in first aid trauma.
You think that should be a prerequisite at this
Without
point?
question. I wouldn't even stand next to somebody that hadn't at least taken the first aid course, let alone the hostile environment course, because it just teaches you to think in a very different way. And I didn't take the course until 4 or 5 years into my career, actually 6 years into my career. And I had made all these mistakes that other people made and paid for with their lives, and I was just very lucky. And it was very important to kind of learn and understand it in a more formal sense.
I mean, you talk about Tim Hetherington and Chris Hondros and these folks who, did pay that ultimate sacrifice, and how, perhaps if there had been more training with the journalists that were around them, the outcome could have been possibly different, especially with Tim. I guess he,
Sure.
was a bleeding issue. So, and do you have any thoughts for, I know a lot of people, a lot of photographers who just love the idea, maybe, of going out and covering war. I don't know if it's because they, want to be cool or want to, just have that experience. But do you have any tips or thoughts other than obviously take the courses that you just mentioned before taking that jump? I mean, would you do the same thing that you did when you were a kid today? Just sort of jump on a plane and check it out, learn baptism by fire, literally?
Well, I would hope that I would at least take the courses. I think the courses are incredibly important. I think after that, then there's nothing really I can say except for try to find people that are more experienced to learn from in the field. But I couldn't really be hypocritical and say, oh, don't go and do what I did, but try to do it smarter than the way I did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a limit for you? Has there been would you now go to Syria? Is it different now? I mean, obviously, with all of the danger that's going around, have you been trying to keep away from those really dangerous places?
I think it's important to kind of really understand the reality on the ground. And I haven't worked in Syria yet, and I think it's a difficult situation, especially now. But I think if the right opportunity came and it was safe within reason to go and do it, I would, of course, do it. But I think that things in some places in the world have changed dramatically in terms of the stakes and in terms of, again, the understanding of the power of journalism, especially photojournalism, that people are really trying to control it. One of the greatest things that's different now than it was when I started through the 90s is the fact that everybody can see your work on their phone. So there's no more sort of working in sort of like my work is going off to a magazine in America that nobody in Syria is going to see. And that understanding of everybody seeing the work is changing the playing field dramatically.
Have you been taking up social media at all to share your work? Do you feel that has a new, different role in the type of work that you do, conflict work?
Absolutely. I mean, I think all types of work. I think having a social media audience is an incredibly powerful tool for a photographer, and the ability that now we are actually becoming publishers, that we're starting to have audiences that rival audiences of magazines. And so at 7, we can reach more than 1 million people through our feeds, and that's incredibly exciting.
Yeah.
I think, having this ability to directly go to the people that are interested in your work.
So that's a great segue. 7. I wanted to talk about, obviously you worked with all of these amazing conflict photographers throughout the years, and created this agency with 7 of you guys originally. Can you talk about that?
Well, 7 was really born out of the time period where Bill Gates with Corbis and Mark Getty from Getty were buying up all these small agencies, and they understood the value of the image on the web. And an agency called Saba, run by Marcel Saba, he sold it to Corbis. And myself, Gary Knight, John Stenmeyer, and Anthony Cortachville were all part of that agency. And when Marcel sold it, we realized that we didn't really have full control over all aspects of our career, which is something that many photographers don't appreciate or handle very well. Like, this is what we do, as noble as photojournalism is and so on. It's still a business, and it's still necessary for us to be able to continue to do our work. And so while we didn't have anything against Corbis or Marcel, we realized that we wanted to have more control over our lives, our photographic lives. And that was the impetus and nucleus of starting the agency. And then we asked Jim Noctway and Alexander Boulard and Chris Morris, who were at different agencies at the time, if they wanted to join us. And 7 is now, next year, going to celebrate its 15th anniversary. So we're very happy about that. But we're more happy that we actually showed that the industry has room for Corbis and a Getty, but also for 7, for Magnum, and also many people followed us, like Noor and Prime and other small collectives of photographers, to show that there's a way to do this.
Yeah. And so what does it get? What do you think is the best advantage of being part of an agency? Does it give you the freedom to not have to worry? You just go out and you cover it, you send it back, and it's dealt with.
No, not the way that 7 works, and probably some of the other agencies. It's still very much, we own the agency. We are business partners as well as photographers. So we are responsible for making sure we have staff that can deal with things, but also being very active in representing our work and making sure we know where we want it to go and trying to help it get to that place. But what I think one of the advantages of being creating a 7 or a Noor or something is that you're creating a brand that represents something that should hopefully open up doors, enable you as a group to do things that it would be more difficult to do as an individual.
Right on, right on. And at this point now, you have a handful more members of 7.
We do.
What's the total? What are we at now?
We're at 18 photographers.
We're about 18. And then there's a mentor program, right? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Mentor program is something that we thought about from the beginning. Conversations with Gary Knight, John Stenmeyer, and myself were very much involved in education and trying to make sure the next generation of photographers have the right tools. So we established this program to give young photographers that didn't have the opportunity to go to school or have money to go to lots of workshops or so on, looking for sort of raw talent in various places to help them. And so they have a 2-year relationship with the agency and with the photographer. I mean, currently we have an Iraqi photographer, Ali Arkardi, who's on the front lines of Ramadi as we speak. We've had some great photographers that have come through the program. Anastasia Taylor-Lynn is one. Benedict Curzon, who's now at Noor. We've had lots of different amazing photographers. The idea is basically not for them to automatically go through the ranks at 7, but to go back into the world after that and make their way.
Interesting. It's like a little graduate program or something.
Exactly.
In a way.
Yeah.
How does one apply for something like that, or do you find them and reach out to them?
No, we just actually closed our application process. We had, I think, over 350 applicants to the program, and we'll accept, I think it will be probably between 3 and 6, which we'll announce on January 5th or 6th.
Oh, that's exciting.
And then every year we'll make another call.
Yeah. So you were mentioning a little bit about when we were talking about 7, you guys are a business partner. You have to have a certain business savvy to continue what you're doing. You could be an amazing photographer, but if you're not able to make a buck, you're not able to buy the tickets and get the work out there, you're not going to be successful. So I want to talk a little bit about, your business savvy, the different things that you've been doing on top of, taking wonderful photos and things like, publishing books. Maybe that's what we can do. We can kind of segue into your most recent book, but you've published 3 books so far, and this is your 4th book. Is there a good business in selling photography books? I understand that's kind of especially in the photography world, difficult to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, especially in terms of politics or war, not a huge market, but I think it's important to be able to create a physical product that represents a subject that the photographer is very involved with and very passionate about. And I think that in terms of the business side of it, then it's also a very good marketing tool. And that's, again, like kind of using that idea of, how do you use this to kind of further your career, not only about the work that's important for what you want to say,
right,
but then there are other levels that are involved.
And so I'm going to go ahead and jump into some of these. Let's go ahead and talk about the Lost Rolls, this new project that you've just put out there, give me the details about the project and also the process of publishing a book and the difficulty and all that.
Well, I mean, the idea came out of a conversation with another photographer, Dan Milner, who now works at Blurb as sort of photographer at large. And he and I were looking for a project to do together. And I had recently seen this sort of bag of film that I hadn't processed, undeveloped negative and slide film. And so I said, hey, would you be interested in processing this film? Let's see what's on it. And so we processed 30 rolls of film, and it was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. There's something here. And in the end, we processed more than 200 rolls of film, which created the Lost Rolls project. And the book, it talks about a lot of different things. It talks about memory, talks about the end of the analog era, but it talks about something that's universal, or not universal, but almost universal with many people, certainly over the age of 30, when you ask them, do you have an undeveloped roll of film? Or a film that's exposed but undeveloped.
Uh-huh.
And I'd say probably 70% of the people that I ask have a roll of film in a drawer, in a bag, or something like that. And we have these memories that are locked up in these little canisters. And what was really, for me, was very interesting, disconcerting but fascinating, was that I had always thought that when I looked at a photograph that I knew, I could tell you exactly what was happening that day, where I was, what happened afterward of the photograph, what happened before. And then as I started to look at this film, I realized I didn't know who the people were sometimes. I didn't know where I was. I certainly didn't know the dates. And that was really a interesting experience into my own sense of what I was doing, who I was as a photographer, what I had created. And I think that while this book is about my experiences, it's something that I think can be interpreted on a much bigger scale.
What would you say is one of the more interesting photos or unexpected photos that you found in this bag of lost film? Not lost film, but...
Well, it was a mix. So you have like the degradation of time. So like this cover photograph is it's like I don't even think with Photoshop I could create this kind of effect. And this is like a combination of light leaks and mold on the negative, kind of creating an image which is a fine image on its own, but taking it to a whole other level. So looking at the work in that way was quite fascinating. And then there was other images that I saw that I had remembered taking but could never find. So all of a sudden I was having these memories kind of being completed. Like, oh, great, now I finally saw that image that I've been looking for. Like there was a photograph from the President Clinton doing something on a trip that I remember taking but I could never find. But at the same time, I was seeing images that I had no idea what was happening. And so I was now creating incomplete memories. And it was kind of like this kind of back and forth between the two.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So here is a copy of the book. I showed it earlier. Nice size. It also has a sort of, what would you call this? It's not glossy. It's like a matte sort of feel inside.
It's uncoated paper to kind of give that same sort of like it's a little bit. It enhances the degradation of the images as well.
Smells real good. Oh yeah. So, and where can we get this? TheLostRolls.com.
LostRolls.com, Blurb.com, or on Amazon. Any place like that, you can go directly to buying the book.
Awesome. Okay, so back into some more business. So, you're doing the workshops now. You've got one coming up, you said, in the Mississippi Delta.
Right, teaching with barefoot workshops at the end of January, beginning of February of 2016.
And this is part of Seven's workshops. This is
the other
barefoot
workshop.
Sorry, and then also you got the 7 workshops.
Then we have a huge workshop in June in Barcelona, where the entire agency, we are going for our annual meeting, and then we're going to do 3 days of workshops and lectures there with a local producer, and I think that's going to be pretty valuable.
How long have you been doing these workshops and speaking?
I've probably been doing it for a good part of the last 15 years or so. I think it's another way to interact with audiences, for people to see your work and to have a different experience.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things, especially now in the digital age, where your kind of work goes out there and you often, maybe you get a like or a comment or two, but you don't really understand like how it's affecting people. The ability to teach, the ability to give a lecture is a really kind of re-inspiring process for me.
That's great. We've got someone's trying out the Bose system in the background, it sounds like. Okay, so speaking workshops, commercial. So let's see here. You are now. I should go to your website here. I have a Vimeo page, and I want to have this rolling in the background. But you're also doing some cinematography these days, and I was wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about getting into shooting video. When did that start? Was it in the digital world when the 5D Mark II came out and you were suddenly able to take video with an SLR, or was it before that?
No, I've been shooting video for probably at least 12 or 13 years. My kit used to be like a Sony PD-150 shooting DV tape along with my still cameras. And I really, very early on, realized that our audience was becoming more and more fragmented, and some people were resonating, some more with motion, some more with stills, and creating sort of mixed media pieces very early on.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when the 5D Mark II came out, it was a whole other amazing world that all of a sudden I didn't have to carry around a separate camera, and that was very exciting. And now I'm actually doing dedicated documentaries, film only, as well as still doing mixed media of combining motion and stills.
Now, I see, like, right now we're looking at, violence, we're looking at conflict. Do you, when you're in these situations, do you choose to shoot still over video for any particular reason? Like here, were you there shooting particularly video, or did you decide to shoot video in these instances mixed with stills?
It would depend on the client, it depend on the purpose, but basically if I'm shooting both, if I'm shooting stills and motion, then I'm always going to gravitate towards the still image as sort of the final, like the best picture is going to be the still image.
Right.
And the video will be the B-roll. But now I'm also being hired just to shoot film only, to shoot video only.
Right.
And that also enables me to just concentrate on all the different aesthetics and values of shooting motion.
Do you feel that shooting video gives tells the story better in certain instances than others? And
I think without question, video for sure, without question, sound. I mean, many times, especially in conflict, where I'd be stuck in a foxhole with a soldier and there's so much sound and motion going on, but still images wasn't really able to capture that. And it would have been great to have had, at the very least, audio, if not motion. But there are other times when I think that because of the way that the human mind works, the power of the still image will always be so much more powerful in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's great. I mean, I don't know, especially, I don't know if it's so important in the world of conflict photography so much, but do you think that a lot of times students that are coming into the real world, they're told, you have to have a skill set that's greater than just taking still photos. You got to be able to know how to record audio. You got to be able to know how to edit video and shoot video and all these things. Do you think that that's, in order to make a living these days, you have to be able to supplement your skill set more so than when you started?
I think we're now visual storytellers, and then we have many different tools that we have at our disposal to use. But at the same time, I think being a jack of all trades and being an expert editor with motion, expert audio, expert video expert in photography is a little bit difficult and a little bit too much to ask. I think people should know how those tools work, but they should really have a strength in one of them. And then you collaborate, especially with motion. Motion is about collaboration. Mark Peterson from Redux Pictures and I are directing a film together.
Oh, wow.
So we're working on, there's strengths that he has, there's strengths that I have, that we hire an editor to work, there's strengths that the editor will have, and so on. I think that's an important thing that not only the photographers should realize, but the clients are just now starting to realize. So when I spoke about earlier about the Haitian adoption story, I was shooting motion as well, and I finally was able to convince People magazine to put in a budget for an editor, which is something that 2 years ago they never would have done. So now all of a sudden I was able to collaborate with somebody that was an expert at editing and create a film that would have been much better than had I been sitting there working on it.
Absolutely. Let's move on to, again, in the world of business, you are shooting commercial work as well. And on your website, you have a gallery ranging from all sorts of different work, restaurants, PSAs as well. How important is it for you and others to diversify what they do, not just shooting editorial, because editorial, like we said before, doesn't pay very well. Commercial pays so much more. When did you decide to get into commercial? How much commercial work do you do compared to editorial these days, and how important is it to your bottom line to be able to do what you love doing?
I've been shooting commercial for about 15 years, and I think that this idea of diversification is incredibly important. I think that for a photographer to think now that they can survive strictly on editorial photography, once they start having life commitments like a mortgage and a family, is very difficult. And so commercial is part of a multitude of revenue streams, from gallery sales, speaking engagements, workshops, editorial photography, and commercial. All those combined enable me to survive. And the reason I'm successful in commercial is that I'm hired to basically replicate my editorial approach that I would do for a magazine and apply it towards an advertising campaign. And I don't do a lot. I do probably 2 to 3 campaigns a year, which is just enough to be able to make sure that I can go off to Greece and document the refugee crisis without an assignment, and still be able to continue to function as a working photographer.
I noticed, and I think we're going to get to it also, the PSA campaigns that you've done. There we are. So tell me about this, shooting an assignment like this.
Well, this is an amazing project called, it's the methproject.org. It's funded by one billionaire who wants to stop meth use among teenagers. And basically, it's a combination of print and motion. I shot the print campaigns from a couple of years ago. And they say this is the 6th version of it. And so they've done studies that wherever they put up these campaigns, the billboards and print ads, meth use among teenagers goes down by like 50%.
Really?
And so that's actually has even more impact than going off and doing a story for Time magazine on meth addicts. Because here it's like going directly to the potential users and users of the drug and actually having an effect. And so this was a great campaign where we cast, these are all real people, these are all actors and models. And then I had a guy who runs a meth clinic for addicts come in and coach them on what it was like to be a meth addict, and able to kind of really get something real that could actually have an effect on people.
It's so different than what you are usually known for, this sort of work, because it's, like you said, you got some models and everything. Did you Did you use lighting in these situations? Or are you shooting all documentary?
No, this was lit. It was cast. I mean, it was like a full-on. The client was there.
How often did you light?
The whole thing.
I just can't imagine you with lights and strobes and stuff.
Only light for commercial. I've never, or very rarely would I light for editorial clients.
Right. Interesting. Really cool stuff here. So more recently, you've been shooting lots of domestic work as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm on your website now. We've got Newton, where the Sandy Hook massacre took place. And I noticed on your website here that the photos are square format. And I'm wondering what you were shooting with and why you changed formats.
Well, I was on assignment covering the aftermath of Sandy Hook for People, so that was traditional 35 millimeter color work, and then I was also felt like there was something else that needed to be said, and so I wanted to give them the option. So these are all shot with the iPhone.
All right.
Black and white. It's very simple, kind of, but just creating a very different mood than the color work that people normally want us to use.
Have you noticed, I've seen a lot of photographers going out there to conflict zones, shooting hipstamatic and, doing different iPhone work. Do you find it's just another tool, or do you find that you get better access, you get more intimate shots ever because you're just using an iPhone versus a SLR or whatever else you use?
I mean, it's without question, it's just another tool. It's nothing specific, iPhone photography, whatever. It's another camera. But the interaction that you have with your audience sometimes or the people you're photographing is very different. A really good example was that I was in Haiti maybe a year ago doing aftermath earthquake photographs and people that were still living in the displacement camps. Went in there with my large cameras, SLRs, and within like 10 minutes, people were like, just please leave us alone, go away. Another white guy with a big camera coming in. And I went back to the hotel, dropped the cameras off. I came back with my iPhone, went back to basically the same people with my phone, and the reaction and interaction was completely different. Because they have camera phones, maybe not an iPhone, but they have a phone that takes pictures.
Sure.
And all of a sudden, there wasn't something big over my face, and it was a very different experience, and I was able to work that way.
And I've found that iPhones take beautiful photos these days. I mean, I got the newest one now, the big one, the 6S Plus or whatever, and just the difference actually, especially, do you shoot video on it much?
I've done some video, but not so much for.
It's amazing the difference between like the 6 and the 6 Plus. It's got stabilization in it and everything. But anyway, that's really awesome. I didn't realize that these were iPhone photos, and I'm glad that did catch my eye here. You've also been covering the immigrant crisis happening all over Europe and whatnot these days. Tell me about that. I mean, that's kind of actually, the Exodus is kind of you've been covering lots of those over the years.
I have.
That's because that's part of covering war. Is this one different? Is this just the same, different place, different people? How do you feel about what's going on these days?
It's different in that their journey is they have multiple landing points for their journey, which is I think pretty fascinating. And to be there on the beaches in Greece where they make their first touch Europe for the first time, coming over from Turkey, was a remarkable experience to witness. Seeing people that were coming with nothing, like no bags. I can't even leave my apartment without a bag. And these people are leaving their lives behind. They have their paperwork, they have money, they have their phone, and that's it. It was incredible to see that. And the joy, the relief, the frustration, the sadness, all these different emotions. And then, because Greece is not their final destination, they're realizing that they now have to go.
It's just one step.
One step into, they don't even know what's next. I mean, some people didn't even understand where they were. And other people had been traveling for a month or so to get there. And other people basically got on 2 airplanes, got on a boat, and had gone from Syria to Greece in a matter of 2 days. So everybody's experiences were incredibly difficult. But the idea, and coming from a family of people that immigrated to this country, it's witnessing this, the beginning of their family's lines for the first time was remarkable.
Yeah, and I've noticed that there's also, I mean, I've seen other folks that are there as well and using new media in different ways. Patrick Whitty was doing, what do you call that, with the live streaming? Periscope. He was periscoping from one of these places, which is a totally different medium. I've never seen it used in a news situation like that. And I remember I was editing some corporate job and watching Netflix on my screen, and all of a sudden I see a post saying, "Hey, check this out." Hungarian border, Syrian refugees and whatnot. And I switched to it, and I was just engaged, just like, this is happening right now. You feel the intensity.
Right.
You can feel what it's like to be a shooter as well in these situations. Have you thought about doing anything along those lines? You stick straight to just documenting it for a later. There's a certain rush to get information out there now, and nowadays you can just have a camera web streaming it from almost anywhere. Do you think that that's a good thing, a bad thing? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's situation dependent. I think that there are times when doing something like Periscope from this would be fantastic and is fantastic, and other times where looking at live TV from going into the San Bernardino shooter's apartment is just the wrong way to do it. So I think that there's some real, there's some things that we ourselves need to understand and to judge and to be, to do our journalism correctly.
Mm-hmm. Also, you have some projects that you've been working on. Have you found that with the recent sort of danger that's been going on in these countries like Syria, Libya, that you've been spending more time domestically, or do you think that hasn't changed anything? It's just you kind of avoid.
No, I'm going to places where stories that I'm interested in and want to explore, and then also where I find that there can be support to be able to get the work seen and hopefully to be able to create the work. So it just kind of depends. Every year is different, and my motivation and dedication goes from place to place.
There's tons of content on your website, but there's a project section, and I just chose the top most recent one. But you've been covering gold mining in the Amazon. That's totally different, obviously, than conflict. Although maybe there's some conflict around it, I'm not sure.
Well, actually, it's done with that idea that it is a different type of conflict. It's this sort of man versus nature conflict. And you look at like a photograph like the one you just showed, where you're seeing really, it could look like this is a bomb, the crater of a bomb, but it's actually all man-made as they're ripping the environment apart. And so this project is about illegal gold mining and its effect on the environment, given that they're deforesting the Amazon and so on, and what that means both for the people that live there as well as for people here in New York or in other places around the world.
How did this project start up? Like, when did you think, I'm going to go to the Amazon and cover this?
Well, this project was interesting. It was an NGO that deals with the Amazon asked myself and Donovan Webster, who's a journalist we'd worked together in Iraq and some other places, if they could do a documentary film about us going to document illegal gold mining. And so this is a companion piece for an actual film that's been shown at various film festivals.
Oh, wow.
And about it was shown in COP20 last year and so on, to all the presidents and so on, to talk about the impact of illegal gold mining using myself and the writer as the narrative vehicle.
Oh, wow. And is this available to be seen anywhere, or is it still kind of not out yet, the movie?
I think you can go to amazongold.org. I think you can find it there.
amazongold.org. Wow. Well, great. I can't help but mention that your scarf has become cult status situation. I'm going to go ahead and pop this up. You're in. I just Googled your name.
And this came up.
And this came up. Yeah. And then also there is a. Let's see here. Where did I put it? You actually there's a Facebook page. Believe it or not, devoted to your scarf.
It's not run by me, and actually my scarf won't even be my friend. No. So I'm still waiting for my scarf. If you're out there, please accept my friend request. I'd like to be friends with
I just actually tried to request your friendship, your scarf's friendship as well. Yeah. That's really funny.
But it's actually, while it's funny and it's a little bit of a fashion statement and stuff, but there is a lot of purpose to having a scarf in the field, and there are many different reasons. And I even mentioned in this New York Magazine piece about actually covering gold mining, where I fell down into a mine, and another photographer was able to pull me out because of my scarf.
Really?
So that's just one of many reasons to have this sort of extra tool with you.
So your scarf might have saved your life.
Well, it certainly stopped me from getting super wet in a really, contaminated pool of water in a gold mine. But there have been other times where we've used it for bandaging people up and other things for sure. I mean, there's, of course, you can carry other things, but it definitely can be incredibly helpful.
Right on. Well, I do want to, if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. Open it up to a few questions in the audience. So go ahead and hand it over.
Hey, Brian, I'd love to know about the effects of the mercury that you saw in the Amazon. That was I actually saw the documentary on it. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
And the effects of the mercury on the gold miners themselves. Did you get a lot of that interaction? Did you get a lot of the
I didn't. We asked them. The mercury is obviously incredibly poisonous, and there's a scene both in the film and in the photography of the mercury is used to separate the gold from the soil, and there's a scene of a man getting into a barrel in shorts, bare feet, and mixing the mercury together with his feet. So he's essentially killing himself right in front of us, but not in the immediate sense. And one of the problems with mercury poisoning is that it takes so long for the effects to come in that when you explain to these guys this mercury is going to kill you, they don't believe it. It's like, oh, I've been working here for a year, I'm fine.
It does, and when they're burning it in the gold pan, when you see them actually burning it with the torch,
And they're breathing it in.
The gases are actually more harmful than people think. Anyway, thank you.
So it's something that there's a number of different universities with Amazon Aid, which is the organization that I did this documentary for. They're helping do studies to really kind of make mercury illegal or as hard to get as possible.
Any other questions from the audience out there? No? Was there anything online? Okay. So is it, sort of in closing, and I can't stress that, we've talked about a lot here, but it doesn't even come close to, the lengthy career that you've had and the amazing work, which you can find on the website and also on Seven's website. But do you have any sort of words of wisdom to folks that want to follow in your footsteps in any way? What would you give the younger you? What kind of advice would you give the younger you?
Well, I would say make sure that you're passionate about this type of work. It's hard to do both in terms of the work and in terms of a lifestyle, but it's definitely possible. I think we're at a time now where there are lots of opportunities to reach your audience with the stories that you want, which is, I think, really exciting.
Uh-huh.
And if you really have the interest in trying to do anything related to conflict, without question, you have to take these courses. So go to the RISC site, go to the Rory Peck site. They'll give you a list of the different companies that teach the hostile environment courses. They also offer scholarships to help pay for the classes. I think that's really incredibly important. And then I think also one of the things that I teach in my workshops is understand that this is a business. And in order for you to tell the stories that you want to tell, you have to still be able to survive. So understand that. And if you can do that from the beginning, you have a very good chance of being very successful and getting the stories that you want out to the people.
Amazing. All right. Well, Ron, people can find you. Just search your name on Facebook. You've got some pages up there. Your Instagram, social feeds are just Ron Haviv?
RonHaviv.com, and then Instagram, RonHaviv_VII, and Twitter, Ron Haviv.
Okay. And then Twitter is, Seven's social is just
VII Photo.
VII Photo. Great, Ron. Everyone else, you can check out Photo Brigade at photobrigade.com/live, where you can see these wonderful events. Please, please, please subscribe to our YouTube, Photo Brigade on YouTube, so you can see when we post events like this. Thanks again to Adorama, their event space, adorama.com/events, photobrigade.com/live, and again to Canon Professional Services and Tenba. Ron, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank
All
you.
right. Take care. See you next time, everyone.